on
Well,
mute
mine
now.
should be on all the time once I start talking.
Yeah,
Okay, good evening. Welcome to our caucus, September 19th. As everyone knows, we asked that Rubicon Smart Cities would come in to present to City Council this evening. I want to thank you for being here tonight. We have Jack Reager, our IT Director, Eileen Cipriani, our Business Administrator. Fred Hannon is here from Rubicon, and Tim Manning from Rubicon as well. Obviously, there's been some discussion at the City Council level and from many of the citizens and concern about Rubicon and the implementation of Rubicon. I'm trying to remember. I think that the contract predates me being on council. I think it was the fall of 2021 that it was approved, if I'm correct. But we appreciate you taking the time to come in and speak with us today. I know I submitted some questions, and I have those questions here. But I'm going to turn it over to all of you to get started. And it looks like you have a presentation, and then I guess we'll follow up with some questions. So welcome, and thank you for being here.
And thank you, Councilman King and Council. We're happy to be here tonight to talk about Rubicon. And Tim and Fred will go through a presentation. Tim is going to walk us through Rubicon so you can see what it's like on a day-to-day basis. So, Tim?
Yes, thank you, Tim Manning. I just want to walk through the slide deck. This is our first page, second page introductions, and then we'll get right into the agenda.
Okay, can I ask you this, just for purposes of communication so that people can hear, if you could move the mic as close to your self as possible,
yeah,
so that people in the audience can hear, and I believe this is being recorded on ECTV as well, so that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Pete. So I'm going to walk you through kind of the driver application, what your solid waste drivers are using, and kind of give you kind of just a big look at it, right? 35,000 square foot view, so you can kind of see how it works. So the drivers, they come in the morning, and we're digitizing the experience, right? Getting rid of paper and moving to a digitized experience. The driver comes in, he logs in, his name, my name's Tim Manning. There's two types of roles. There's a supervisor role and a driver role. For today, we'll just go into what a driver looks like. The driver logs in. We're going to select residential. I'm going to hit here, and then I just set up for Scranton City Council just a route, just to kind of so you can again see the feel and look of the app. Hit start. It's going to log me into the first thing is the Go ahead.
If I could just interrupt. So are DPW workers entering this on their personal phones, or do they? No. Okay, so they have
Devices.
a device. All right. Thank you.
Devices that have been provided by Rubicon.
Thank you.
Correct. They just log in their mileage, and then they can see the pre-trip here, right? So this is to gather information on the truck, the maintenance, really gather all that information, and they can kind of go right there. This is all customizable, so you can have it so they can take pictures of all of this information, so that all comes back to the operations manager, so they can kind of make decisions for the fleet. I'll hit next. And again, this goes up to 100, and cities can decide what they want. Next, and then you can just sign off here. They sign off. Next, it's going to hit me into My Day. This just gives them a quick snapshot for their day. This is great for any changes to the route, if they see notes or alerts for certain individuals, people with disabilities, they can use these notes here. I'm going to hit OK. Next, it's going to drop me right into my route. And typically, this is where the driver can set the phone up on the dashboard and really not interact, right? The system's going to gather all this great information with our algorithm and our technology. And I like to see it here so they can get a list view and a map view. And you can see these dots here that I set up for you. This is where they can go, and they drive here. And then if they did come to a location that needed, an exception or an issue was reported here, they can either do two things. They can hit this menu here to log an exception. They can also go through, directly tap into it, tap into the resident, and they can log the exception from here. So it gives them two types of views to look at it. So that's one of the main menus.
As they pick up each address, do they tap, does the driver do
Nope.
any kind of action as
The
they do?
driver does not have to interact at all. Our system will collect those service verifications.
Only if it's an acceptance?
Correct.
Is it listed by each 100 block or each individual residence?
Individual resident.
It is?
Each individual collection point, yep, resident.
Okay.
And you can see a list view and you can get a map view. All drivers use it differently. And then here is just the other menu that they need to interact with, right? So that My Day I walked you through, that just is a quick snapshot. They can always go back to it. The route stop list, this is how they can digitize that route list. Typically, that old paper route, that's where that's stored today. There's navigation. There's an edit route. That's mostly for supervisors. And you can add a wait ticket, right? So when they go to the facility, they can go to the facility, take a picture of that, and they can actually manually enter it in as well. So you can see it's very simple for them to log a wait ticket. And then a number of other features is the route assist, and then view exceptions, that sort of thing. So this is just a quick snapshot, quick view of what the drivers are using today to effectively manage their routes. So again, giving you that digitized experience from an app perspective. Does that make sense? Helpful?
What's that?
Is that helpful?
Yeah,
good.
absolutely. I haven't seen that before.
So just for context, this is the driver experience. What we're looking for drivers to do on the daily is take their device, log into their device, they have their route, work through their route, log their trip up to the landfill, then come back, complete, and do a post-trip. So we've digitized those inspections pre and post. We've digitized the recording of the weight tickets when they go to the actual landfill. It's those 5 steps that we're looking for from this tool set. They've done a markedly better job since we've done some retraining. We'll talk about that as we go through, but we thought it was important that you see what this tool set actually does and how it operates.
Yeah, well, that's good, because some of the complaints have been where, you're in the same block and they go to, 1210, they skip 1212, they hit 1214, they jump up to 1216. I don't know, been hearing a lot of that stuff happening, especially, as it really began to roll out. So that was a big concern, amongst others.
So,
As well as going up one side of the street and not down the other. Did you hear me? As well as going up one side of the street and not down the other.
Right.
So is this device directing them to do that?
No, it is not. So,
Well, what is directing them to do that? Because normally they wouldn't do that.
no. So what we have are the routes that we have from the location that the city has provided to us. And what it will do is, if we had a larger view here, what you would see is service locations. What we would do is build in navigation. We'll get into that a little later on. But the drivers can see, if you have the example up there, where their service locations are. So unless the driver is using navigation, it is not directing them. What they can do is what we refer to as play Pac-Man. They can look at their stops on the map and collect them as they go along the way.
In certain instances, and Fred will talk about exceptions, there is the reality that if somebody didn't bring their bin to the curb, that might not have been picked up. But to your point, if it's a whole side of the street, there's something different going on there. So we'll talk more specifically about what could or couldn't be happening with use of the tool. And I don't know, Fred, if we want to switch over. Yep.
Sure.
are they going up to the dump like twice a day at scheduled times? At this point in time.
There's not scheduled times to go to the dump. What had happened was there's the possibility that trucks would be overloaded, so you can't go over your tonnage. So in those cases, going to the dump twice a day would make sense. We've actually installed scales in 4 of the trucks, so that has been very helpful to the
So
drivers.
What year were the scales installed? Because there's been, what year were the scales
This
installed?
year.
This year. Wasn't there at least one truck that had a scale already going back several years?
That predates us, I don't know.
Okay, so there's 4 trucks right now that have scales.
Correct.
They're taking pictures of their weight slips at the dumps.
We'll take you through all.
Yeah,
Okay.
maybe if you
Yeah,
want to walk
sure.
through, Fred, because that'll all come through this presentation.
Okay.
So first of all, let me thank you all for the opportunity to join you tonight. I'm Fred Hannon, Vice President of Customer Success with RUBICON. Tim Manning is our Senior Manager, and he's our main point of contact here for the City of Scranton. So we have a presentation today that we'll go through, and hopefully we'll answer many of your questions, and we'll field others as you have them. So on the agenda, what we're going to talk about is what does Scranton look like before Rubicon, give you a historical overview. We'll talk about the Rubicon contract and the services we're providing. Look at the review to date. Talk about driver highlights. The discussion around revenue and savings estimates. We'll then talk about the fleet optimization and the next steps associated with that, and then we'll take your questions. But at any point, please stop me with any questions you all may have. Okay? So what does Scranton look like before Rubicon? When we started working, we did a pilot with the city in 2021. And what we do is, to your question about where are these locations, we will ask you all to tell us where your service locations, where are you servicing in the city of Scranton? We didn't have that for Scranton. There were no maps, there were no routes. Most of the stops, all of the stops pretty much, were in the driver's head. So the drivers would go out in the morning, they'd perform their routes, but there was no visibility for leadership, for management to know just where those stops and locations were taking place. And what's very important is also to obtain tonnage information. There was no way for that to happen. What we did is we looked at your quick overview of your operations. Personnel consists of 13 drivers, 28 laborers. You have 18 trucks out there, and you're providing trash, commingled recycling, cardboard recycling, and paper recycling. So, as I said, we did a pilot in 2021, but we contracted in April of 2022, or in 2022, I should say. But you're not alone. Like, Scranton's not alone. We have our technology deployed in 100+ cities. We're doing commercial relationships with 8,000 plus customers, and we have the technology deployed and it's touching on 13 million locations. That's for all of our cities nationwide. So what does that look like? Here are the details of the partnership we have with the City of Scranton. We have a 3-year contract. We launched that service in April of 2022.
To start with April 22, so does the contract begin in April, or did the contract begin in January?
No, we would actually have to look at the executed date, but I would say it's sometime in 2022, if we can get the specifics on that for sure. But yes, we did sign a contract in 2022. It's a contract valued at $165,277. And what we have is a combination of hardware and software. The hardware we're talking about, so when we talk about knowing where the vehicles are, we install telematic devices, and that allows you all to see where your vehicles are. So in the past, when I said leadership had no insight into what was happening throughout the course of the day, they now have that because there are telematic devices that can tell them where the vehicles are. It also tells you about driver behavior, their driving, so hard braking, acceleration, speeding, things of that nature. But for the most part, it gives you visibility into where your vehicles are at any given time. And then we talked about the personal devices. They are not personal devices, they're iPads, and they are mounted in the vehicle. So these are Rubicon-provided devices. The drivers go through the experience that Tim showed you earlier of logging in, and then what they do is they place that tablet in a mount and they go about their day. Behind the scenes, all of this information makes its way into a portal, and that's what's represented there with that laptop. So your leadership team has access in looking at what's happening throughout the course of the day real time. And then as far as what the services are provided under the contract, we did the digitization of your operation, digitization of your operation. We provided training, and we are engaged in a fleet optimization.
So with that first slide,
Yes.
so the contracted value is 165,277. It was broken up into 3 years. And also there was a fee on there, and forgive me, I'm going to probably be asking a lot of questions.
No,
It's
it's
been
fine.
quite some time that we've been waiting to have you guys in. But there was also a $250 an hour charge for other services. If there
Other
was any-
services, if there
Have
were-
you guys ever billed for any of that time, or it's just?
We have not. We have not. And that's optional, right? Like if you decided you wanted to do something above and beyond. So the launch, the technology, the software, that's included in that 165. The fleet optimization is also included in the 165. If for, let's say, example, you decide to do an integration with your 311 services, that's what that rate covers. But we have not had to trigger that.
Gotcha. Yeah, so like the first year was like 70, it was around 76,000, right? And that includes the optimization, all of that. And then the next 2 years are around 44,000 each. And that's for software updates, things like that, correct?
Yeah, so the 165 is broken out over 3 payments. So in year 1, there was a $32,000 setup fee plus the $45,000 annual. And then in year 2, there's another $45,000, and I'm rounding that up, but it's
Yep,
$45,000. And then the final payment would be in year 3. That's the final $45,000. You have paid the first 2. You've paid the setup plus the first 45, and then year 2 of 45.
Correct. Yeah, and everything in that first year contractually has been completed up to this point?
Yes, we are in the process of finalizing the optimization, so you do not owe us anything more. We are working with you all on the optimization. You've been digitized, you've been trained. We will continue to do additional training as necessary. It's not like there's a cost for anything, as I said, other than should you come to us and say, let's do this, that, or the other, and you have the pricing for that in the contract.
Okay. We're still in the optimization phase?
You are launched, and I think there's a distinction that we'll make, and hopefully, please let me know if it's not clear, but you are launched, and we need time to see your operation, and that's where optimization comes in. So we'll get into that a little later on, but please
Yeah, so
make sure that
there's
that's
the
clear.
optimization phase, and then there's the official, and you had a terminology for it in the contract, but.
There's
I
a
forget
launch
what it is.
phase, which is what we're in now, so we are launched, and then there is optimization, and so we are working through optimization now.
Okay, and there was a satisfaction piece, so optimization, once we're satisfied, then we move to the official.
Well, at that
rollout.
point, the contract would be fully realized at that
All
point.
right, thank you.
Okay? So if we look at what we've done to date, looking at milestones, we've digitized your operations. So when we talked about early on, there were no routes, there were no paper routes, there were no locations to speak of. You now know where your locations are. So, your crew, your leadership team knows where they are servicing because we've digitized your operation. We talked about the telematics and the value that you get from that. Drivers have been trained, and there are dates associated with all of this. So this is what leads up to what we consider the city of Scranton being launched. So we started this digitization effort in February of 22. We installed your telematics also in February of 22. There was a driver training that took place in April of 22, along with management. That's training on the portal. So drivers were trained on the app that Tim showed you all earlier, and your leadership team was trained on the portal, the back-end system. And then you were officially launched in April of 2022, April 25th of 2022. Fully launched means drivers went out, they had digitized operations, they had tablets to be able to capture where they were going, make exceptions, everything of that nature as of April 25th of 2022.
So you're saying it was officially launched last year?
That is correct, yes.
And when you say launched, that means the system's in place and running. So as it ran from April of '22 till this past spring of 2023,
Yes,
fully launched, fully utilized by the drivers.
correct, yes. It was available to the drivers, yes.
Now, available, I get, but was it implemented, was it used?
It was implemented.
Weekly, daily, from 2022 until today?
Yes, correct. What I will tell you is it is available. Like you said, it has been available since April 25th of 2022. Has it been used? We will talk about that. Usage has not been what we would like to see, but we've taken steps to address that. So think we're a couple of steps from that, but please,
Okay,
let me
go
know
ahead.
if we don't address that for you. So what have we done? We talked a lot about where we've been and where we are. So right now, all of your operations are digitized. What does that look like? You now have 104 weekly routes that are in the system. You have 52 trash routes, 26 commingled recycling, 13 cardboard, and 13 paper recycling routes. These are routes that are digitized. No longer are you relying exclusively on the drivers to tell you where they are going and who they are servicing. You could take a driver, you could hand them a tablet, put them in a vehicle, and tell them to follow, and they now have routes where they know where they're going. What are the benefits of that? So obviously, management's now aware of where collections are taking place. We talked about earlier, you didn't have that visibility. You have it today through a combination of the telematic device plus the drivers engaging with the technology, excuse me. You have real-time route visibility, and there's also flexibility in the system. So if a truck goes down and it had, let's say, 100 more stops on it, what you can do is take those 100 stops, digitally move them to another driver's route, and that driver will pick up those stops. So you now have the flexibility to, on the fly, make changes to routes based on what's happening in your operation.
So both of those points, so the first benefit there, management awareness of collection operations. So our refuse manager could see exactly where he is during the day, how much garbage is still on this, how much refuse is still on the streets, and know how much there is to go. And
Yes,
what's been
so
collected.
we have a route count. So let's say I'm on Route 5 on a Monday. It tells you that I have a total of 525 stops that I am anticipated to hit that day. At any time, you can go in as a manager and look at my progress. So I've now completed 200 of those 525 stops. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about real-time visibility. You have access to see. So to your point, 225 or 200 of those stops have been completed, have been serviced. You've got another 325 that you need to hit today.
Yeah, and is that being utilized by our managers currently?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And then the next one, the flexibility and coverage. So in your contract, I think it was considered ad hoc routes, and you would
Yes.
download the routes, you would send them out. Has that been something that's been utilized up until this point?
It's been used sporadically.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thanks.
I would also assume that this would make it easier for drivers then who are not familiar with the route or don't normally do that route, if they're covering someone, then if it's in that person's head,
Yes.
then now they can
Yes.
see it
Yeah.
and be able to follow it.
Absolutely, yes.
Does it allow the ability for real-time, let's say, DPW's contacted and said, hey, they skipped my house, or they skipped a row, to be able, like, how is that handled? Will it communicate to that particular route driver, or send it to somebody else to go back and get it?
They can do it in the system. They can make drivers aware through a messaging format. So if you decide to turn on a functionality that allows you to message drivers, you can send a message to the device and it will say, you've missed 12 Holly Drive. Go back and pick that up. Or what they could do is they could just simply insert that stop into the route, and it becomes a part of your route. So as you're going through and you're looking for 100% completion, that one particular location that you've been notified, and the driver may not be aware of this, right? It just gets dropped in there, and that driver now knows that it's part of the route, and they go about collecting it.
So does dispatch have the ability to do that?
They do, yes. Your dispatch, anyone that has access to the portal, so if you have a laptop access, if you have access to the portal, you can make real-time changes to the routes.
Do you know if that messaging system is being utilized or not?
I'm not sure about it here. The thing about the messaging system is some cities view it as, because it shows up as a text, right? And some cities are concerned about safety and don't want drivers interacting with the device. Just like we don't want to text and drive, you definitely don't want someone texting with a big equipment like a trash truck. So it's configurable. You have the option as part of the package. It doesn't cost anything extra, but cities decide whether or not it's something they would turn on or off.
I know they use the radio a lot too, so they probably just
Exactly,
radio it
yes.
over there. That's
Yeah.
what I was thinking was happening.
Plus, I would think, too, that someone driving a refuge truck, because they're in a neighborhood, it's stop, 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 that, receiving a text, wow, maybe during a stop, might be able to say, oh, geez, we missed one, I can run back. I don't know that it would be the same as driving through
Right.
downtown at 50 or 40 or 30 miles an hour trying to read a text and drive. So, I don't
Well,
know. I would think it would be advantageous to utilize it. But
So if the garbage isn't out, we're taking a picture that the garbage isn't out, right, to avoid go-backs.
That's
So I
it.
don't know, were you talking about a go-back, or you're talking about like the driver happened to miss the block because they took a wrong turn?
I'm talking about a miss.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's an exception, and we've got an example of that coming up here shortly. So this is just talking more about what that real-time visibility looks like. What you have here are the stops. So the stops in green are, what we're looking to service. As they get serviced, they turn to yellow. But that's just an example of what a digitized route looks like. You can see where you have to service. If the driver didn't have knowledge of that route, you can see where I referenced playing Pac-Man. All they have to do is just drive those streets. As they drive those streets, those dots will change colors. So if there's any doubt about what I have serviced, you can look at that, and you want to see all of that turn green. Up in the upper corner there, you see what looks like a combination of different colors, green, purple, red. That's what we refer to as a breadcrumb trail, and that's what the telematic device gives you. Having that telematic device in the truck lets you be able to track where the truck is. In the portal, you can track up to 5 vehicles at any given time. That's what that illustration shows you, 5 vehicles with their different colored breadcrumb trails. We touched a little bit on what that looks like, what does, throughout the course of the day, what does it look like for stops. So that lower illustration, it talks about there are 11,800 stops that are scheduled. Talks about those that are on hold, canceled, and also issues reported. That's just a snapshot. These are different examples of what you see in the portal that gives you that real-time visibility.
And Fred, just to interject, this is actually our data. So this isn't a sales slide. This is showing you how the tool is working today.
Okay. So all of this is contingent upon the driver. Driver engagement is key. The drivers are your eyes on the street. They tell you what's happening in the operation, which is why it's very important that we engage the drivers. So we talked about go-backs and exceptions. So whenever you drive up, the driver drives up. If there's something at the curb that is unacceptable, what you see here is a container. There's like a lot of bulk waste in there. They should take a picture of that, and they did. So if they do not service that location, what happens is that goes into the portal. It allows your leadership team, 311 operators to see this. So when someone calls 605 Depot Street and says you didn't pick up, you can pull that up, you can see that image, and you have visibility into why the driver left it there. That's what an exception looks like. We talk about as the driver goes out, and if the container is not out, if it's not at the curb, we want the drivers to capture that as well. Once again, that gives your leadership team, that gives your 311 operators the opportunity to take that call from 2215 Riverside Drive. When the call comes in, I had my trash out there, you didn't pick me up. There's a picture in there that shows you nothing at the curb. What you're able to see is there's a timestamp associated with that, so you'll be able to let the resident know, I'm sorry, we were actually out there at 9 o'clock this morning. When we drove by, you did not have your container out. That's ideally is what we want the drivers to do. We want them to capture exceptions that give you all, in a leadership perspective, your 311 operators, the opportunity to inform residents and what we refer to as turn those calls. We were there, your container was not out. We were there, your container was contaminated with unacceptable material, whatever the case may be. This is why it's very important that we have driver engagement.
Okay, so 605 Depot Street, there's an abundance there of construction materials, so that's, they shouldn't be picked up. I can see if they're stacked or tied or whatever in the past. But what happens week 2 if it's still there? Is code enforcement alerted to this? Because I saw in the contract where, some of these pieces could be working with other departments.
Yes.
So would they be alerted to this?
That
Not
depends
necessarily
on-
311?
That depends on the process that you all have in place, but ideally, that's
Well, is that
exactly...
in place? Is that process
So,
in place?
so that is what we want to do ideally. So what we want to do ideally is, previously we purchased Talimi software, so that's the rental software. We have this software, and we have the 311 system, and we have OpenGov. We need to integrate these together, and we're looking to reevaluate the trash ordinance and bring it back in front of City Council with the idea that we could figure out a better enforcement mechanism, because what should happen is this photo should go to code enforcement, and the code enforcement housing inspector in that area should go out and address that. That's the process that we want to get to. It works to a certain extent now, but the more data we're able to collect and the more that the drivers are able to identify these in real time, the better we will be at it.
Okay.
Now, you have your weight tickets. Does the system track the truck's weight and tonnage, things like that, or is it?
does.
Will it generate a report for the driver, or is the driver estimating some of those things?
So as a driver, so we have your locations geofence, your yard is geofence, all of your disposal facilities, landfill, transfer stations, MRFs are geofence. When that vehicle enters a geofence, the driver is noticed or notified. We know that you're at the landfill, right? So the system will say, would you like to enter a weight ticket? The driver has the option of saying yes or no. But when that vehicle enters that geofence, when it crosses in, that's when we know that you're there and we should expect to see a disposal ticket. We will get into that because because your driver can opt yes or no, we can see where there are times where it looks like a disposal trip was made, but a ticket was not entered. But there's a tool in the system that allows you to reconcile on the back end, so you capture that as well.
Just to piggyback, your question is Rubicon weighing the trucks and knows the actual weight, or is that not the?
Well, no, the ticket would come from the landfill,
Right,
correct?
yeah.
So the ticket
I
comes
just-
from the landfill, the driver takes a picture of the
got it.
ticket.
Yep.
But does the system generate a report to show you this week was
Yes.
this was that, or is
Yep.
the driver just doing this manually on his own, estimating them?
No, yep, you'll see. It's all, yeah, I wanted to be clear that it's not a scale. So from that standpoint.
Yeah, it's not scale, but
Right.
it's going
Yep.
into the system, the system is tabulating this, and it's able to be a report
Yep.
that's generated. It's not the driver manually estimating his weights and things over the course of the year. All right, we're going to get into weights a little bit after.
Yes. So before we move off of this slide, I want to take note of that second bullet. We did look at your operations, we looked at your driver engagement, and we saw that there was one particular driver that logged 412 issues on his own. Those are the exceptions that you see here in the slide. Contamination, not outs, but there was one driver that was head and shoulders above your other drivers. If we move into what that means, the next slide, I talked about driver engagement and why that is key. Referring back to that driver that entered 412 exceptions on his own, if we could get other drivers to just do a fraction of that, do half of that, you can see how this builds on itself. And when we're talking about the savings to the city, when we're talking about go-backs, the savings that are associated with a go-back. So, we knew that engagement was not where it should be. And so we came in and we did a retraining in August. So we were here August 2nd, and we retrained drivers, familiarized them with the system. If you look at that second bullet there, since that retraining, drivers have logged more issues in the month of August than they did for all of 2023. So 291 issues, exceptions were logged in August, and for all of 2023, leading up to that, January through July, a collected 236.
Do we know why that jumped from July to August?
I can only imagine it's because we put emphasis once again on the program. We saw these numbers. They were not where they needed to be. Working with your team, they suggested that we come out and retrain. We did that in August, and we see like an immediate improvement.
Back in, when we were going through this initially, back in October of '22, I had asked about go-backs. It was something that was in discussion at the time. And I asked how many go-backs were in how many weekly go-backs there were? Would you happen to know that number offhand?
I don't know that offhand.
All right, so the number I got from Mr. Preambo at the time was 5 to 6. Would you say that's an accurate number? 5 to 6 go-backs per week?
Per week?
Per week.
No, it could be significantly more than that.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Like, I would say it could definitely be significantly more than 5 or 6 a week. I mean, if I don't see 5 or 6 a day, I think there's an issue going on.
Okay, yeah, the answer I got then was 5 to 6 per week, and some weeks it's higher when we experience inclement weather.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But that translates into something, right? Like, we're looking at what does that mean? So in addition to increasing driver engagement, once again, if everyone can get to at least half of what that driver number 1 is doing, your number of exceptions significantly increases. We're looking at the city would tag anywhere between, approximately 5,000 exceptions annually. What does that mean financially? We estimate that to send a vehicle, so send a truck out with a driver and 2 helpers, so we factor in the vehicle, the fuel, the salary, to send that truck out for a go-back would be $63. You do that times the number of exceptions, and if you're able to save that, we're looking at $81,000 in annual savings if you no longer have to go back. But you do that because your drivers are engaged and they're giving you the ammunition to say, I was there, I captured no container at the curb, I did my job, and as a result, your 311 operators, your leadership team can let the resident know we were there, your container was not out, we'll see you next week. Entirely up to you all as far as how you handle that, but you have the tools to be able to realize what the drivers on the street are telling you and monetize that. There's significant savings to be had there.
Now, the line graph there, that's all kinds of issues, right? It's not just go-backs.
That's correct. So it could be contamination, not out, you all, that's also configurable. You tell us what's important to you. What do you want to know on the street? Contamination, not out, block containers, whatever it is, there's a list of exceptions that you can have. Whatever's important to you, we can let you know, let your drivers know that they can report that back to you. If there's something out there that isn't in one of our exceptions, you click other, and the driver can type in what the reason is for the exception.
So is the direction of the administration to have no go-backs?
Pardon?
So with this said about, go-backs cost $63, I get it, but, and, for some reason, maybe Mrs. Smulovitz was late getting her garbage out. So because it costs $63, because the iPad identifies as it not being out, is the directive from administration to do no go-backs?
No, not at all. We haven't actually set a policy around that. We're still in data collection. It makes perfect sense that if, my grandson was supposed to put garbage out and forgot, we're not going to leave, Mrs. Smith to struggle with her garbage. But if we collect this and we have a resident that this happens repeatedly, then we know we have an issue.
Okay.
And I would say that that's an evolution. The more comfortable the city becomes with the technology, with the driver engagement, and the strength of the information that's being collected, we've seen cities gravitate to a no-go-back policy. But no one does that on day one. As they become comfortable with the technology, know that its usage is being appropriately used, then cities will possibly gravitate to a no-go-back policy. All right, so.
I wouldn't be in favor of that, the no-go-back. I mean, these residents pay a ton of money for garbage.
Councilman, I don't think anyone's in favor of not collecting everyone's garbage, but if we have the opportunity to see that there is a certain resident that does not put their garbage out.
Well, habitual offender, I get, but.
Right.
But I don't punish them all.
No one's interested in not picking up individuals' garbage if they made an error.
Especially if we're running routes on time. I know, since I was a young child, up until now, my garbage was always picked up almost, I would say, within 5-10 minutes since then, till recently. But if we're sporadic and all over the place, I could see the need for go-backs.
So we're seeing improvement. So the next slide will show us what's happened. So we talked about our numbers, and are they where they should be? Are they where we would like them to be? And the answer is they have not been. So working with your team, the suggestion was made to come out and do a retraining. So we were on site early August, and we conducted a retraining of your drivers, your leadership team, conducted a number of sessions. And we're starting to see, an increase or an improvement since then. So once again, if we look at what the total exceptions were from January through July of 2023, there were 236 total exceptions. Since we trained in August, the number of exceptions in August alone is 291. So surpassing all exceptions year to date in 1 month. But that also means that we need to continue to maintain driver engagement. If the driver doesn't log in, we are blind. We've seen that driver logins have improved by 45%, and wait tickets have also improved by 18%. And that's all since a retraining that took place in August.
So what's the plan for helping to maintain that progress then? What's the incentive for the drivers to continue using it?
I would say that, there are some of the discussions that we've had is what we will tell a city about driver engagement to keep them engaged, some of the conversations around go back. You want to let them know that this information is being used. It's useful information. Continue to capture those exceptions. Because if we know that you are doing your job, then maybe we get to a point where we have a no go back policy. Drivers like knowing that the technology is there and it's supporting the work that they're doing day in and day out. As long as the driver knows that what I'm doing actually means something, then they will continue to stay engaged.
I mean, yeah, are they getting to see what the drivers have in terms of how many exceptions they're entering into the system? So that maybe, well, that truck, they entered this many, maybe they, get competitive with each
Yeah.
other, and then they decide to add some more. Is there?
Yeah, you're not doing that here in Scranton, but there are some cities where monthly tallies that come out, the monthly reports, they incentivize drivers, and it's nothing significant. It may be a Dunkin' Donuts gift card, but it gives them the ability to say, I was top driver this month. I had the most exceptions, whatever the case may be. And that varies depending upon cities, their policies. But we have seen some cities use this as a tool to incentivize their drivers to stay engaged. Something as simple as a monthly gift card. When you add an element of competition, you get people engaged there.
Sure, and it takes, this sounds like, it's a habit that needs to be formed.
Yes.
As well, and it could take a long time to form a habit just with exercise, to get into a maintenance phase of exercise where you're able to keep up with it regularly and have it, not need so much external motivation. So.
And you need to see the results of that, which is why we tell our leadership teams, please let the drivers know the value of what they're doing. Let them know what these exceptions mean. This isn't just a picture that you entered and it goes into a black hole. Share with them, bring them into the process, let them understand that every exception, every go back we can avoid saves the city money. So let them know that the work that they're doing day in and day out means something.
I think that was one of the sort of biggest catalysts when we look at these August numbers. There was a lot of misinformation about what this tool set does with the team down there. They are exceptionally hard workers, and it's the type of thing where if you take what they're doing and now we're changing with a new tool set, it was never really properly explained. I know the comment was made that this contract predated some of you. It predated my time here. So I don't know that technology ever went down and spoke to those folks, or if the previous director spoke to those folks and said, this is what it does and this is what it can do. That retraining in August, it's very apparent in the numbers. Once you start really having people get vested in this tool set and what it can do, you start seeing adoption and usage. It's really that simple. In terms of incentives, it's a great conversation to have. I don't know that there's any mechanisms that we have today, but absolutely, if you're doing what needs to be done to continue to be safe and sort of operate, we need to have some kind of incentive structure there. I know that's not my field of expertise, but just from a management standpoint, there needs to be something.
I think, as the employee, one of the incentives is just literally the fact that it eliminates the he said, she said, and it says, no, here, you said that I didn't pick it up. Well, here's a picture, timestamp, shows exactly we were there. You didn't have it out.
Absolutely.
Right, and, we found that with our code enforcement staff, because people would say, oh, somebody called and said my grass wasn't high, but we would have a picture with the timestamp, here it was high. So I think you're precisely correct.
And I know personally, I've missed it. I forgot to put it out, or I was an hour or two late and I had to suck it up. I didn't call the city. I just, all right, we missed it this week.
Right.
Have to wait another week.
But,
Okay.
with any software implementation, and I'm sure you've probably seen this in your own world, when change is hard. So when you change to a new software system, it does take a while. But I know Jack could probably attest to this. When we first put OpenGov into place, at first everybody wanted to gravitate back to their spreadsheets. And now if it went down for some reason, Jack could probably have 100 calls before 8:30 asking where it is, because we're so reliant on it. And I believe the same thing will occur here as we get more acclimated with it and the drivers realize that there is a benefit to them for this.
I think some of the frustration has come from some of the citizens and some of the people on council, and you guys, all of you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's obviously been a culture shift for a lot of the workers at DPW, and it's taken time. Anytime you try to implement a program, I used to say this when I was in education, you could have the best curriculum, you could have the best program in the world, but it's people and not programs. So the bottom line is, it's all about implementation, and really the people that have to implement it, if they don't embrace it, they don't believe in it, they don't follow it, there's a good chance it's not going to be successful. So it sounds like, as I said, some of the frustration has been the time that has lapsed before we went from 10 to 30 to now 291, and obviously the hope is that will continue, and it certainly appears as though it's moving in the right direction, but I can almost guarantee that's where some of the frustration has come from a lot of the people here in the city and in here, council.
I think it's great to show that some of these trainings we're seeing improvement. These data sets here are showing that the drivers are now logging exemptions. And I think some of the frustration that council got wasn't the fact that we were seeing exemptions or not seeing exemptions. It was the fact that it seemed like the routes, pieces of the routes weren't getting picked up. We were getting calls because at one point in time, it was several weeks in a row, we were getting lots of calls daily about garbage not being picked up, blocks of garbage not being picked up, things like that. So I don't think our frustration here was with this. It was with the routing and the garbage actually be taken up off of the streets. Also, I think the overtime as well, and I'm sure you're going to get into some of those numbers to show that we're following these routes and completing them with fidelity, I guess.
Are you continuing to get those calls? It seems as though that has righted its ship.
It seems. Have we been running this system? These drivers have been running this system every day since April?
Oh, yes.
Occasionally, we do still, but nowhere near the volume. There was a certain point where it was like a 3-4 week period where people are like, what is going on here? It's nowhere near where it was at that point, but I think it's improved quite a bit.
And we are.
So
The numbers bear that out. We're seeing that. Yes.
All right, I'm going to bring up the word usage again. So, I was here when this was proposed to us, and I actually voted no, and for the reasons I had, because I was familiar with a model like this when I was on the school board that didn't pan out. It was called TransFinder. So it was basically the same model with regard to busing. All right, so I was skeptical. So now I'm here, like I said, since you guys are, or before you guys. And what happened 2 years in a row, same month, 2 years in a row, where it was in July, that I guess usage is the word. The system was being used and garbage sat or garbage laid for weeks and days, the hottest days of the year. So it seems like it happened again this year. So is that when it was used again? Or it's been used all along? Why the hiccups in June or July, both years in a row, when this was online, my understanding?
That I can't speak to. What I will say is the system was in place and it was available. There are tools that your leadership management team can look into, and they should have been able to flag that. I don't have visibility into why there were service interruptions in July last year, this year. I'm sorry.
But
I
you
don't-
folks monitor this, right?
Well, we've given you the system, and on a daily basis, the monitoring takes place by your staff.
I
your
know we have a
personnel.
project manager, whatever title that may be, but you folks are a resource too. So you're clarifying to me that you don't monitor any of this, you just troubleshoot when needed, or?
No. So we're not monitoring on a daily basis. As what we do is part of that training is we give your team the tools to be able to monitor this. If we could flip to the next slide, I'll show you a tool in place. So we talked about tonnage and the importance of weight tickets. We can see that the drivers entered in this example 320 weight tickets. You can see what that looks like as far as what it represents in tonnage. But the city has on file 393 weight tickets. So there's a delta there. There are all the weight tickets that the city has were not reported by drivers. Are we monitoring that on a daily basis? We are not. But we've given your team the tool to be able to do so. So above, what you see is an indication that we built into the portal. So when I talked about the truck goes into your disposal facility and it crosses a geofence, what we'll say is it looks like the truck came into a facility 2 times today, but we only have 1 weight ticket. That's what that red ticket indicates. So we are not monitoring on a daily basis, but we've given your team the tools to be able, in this example, to monitor what your disposals look like. So on a daily basis, someone from your team should be reconciling to say, okay, we have 320, but it looks like we're off by 73. The system has been built, tools have been built into the system to give you all the ability to see that.
Well, thank you. So maybe my question should be posed to you guys. So what happened 2 years in a row, almost the same week, where garbage sat or laid for days and weeks? Was that because Rubicon was being used with regards to the word usage, or was it online, or prior to that it wasn't, and then a week after it wasn't being utilized, and the garbage was caught up?
To the best of my knowledge, there was no changes in Rubicon with the system in July of 2 years. So I don't have an explanation for that. We could look and see what happened, but I don't have an explanation. It doesn't seem to correlate and have anything to do with the Rubicon system, as best I could tell.
There was no system change. If there was behavior change, the only thing we can do is go back and look at dates and see if it was being unused or if there was just something that was...
Or engagement. Did engagement occur them 2 weeks, 2 years in a row? Engagement to the apparatus, I'm asking.
We can go back and pull...
Do you understand what I'm saying?
In July, right. Yep.
I'm hearing that when it was used, that's when these problems happened. And then I heard that, then when you stopped using, it got caught up. So, and it happened 2 years in a row, same week, same time. So could you clarify that for me, somebody?
So just to clarify.
Do you understand my question?
No, we'll pull you weekly reports for July. The reality is nothing happened to the system. So we'll pull the reports and then we can go through and figure out what may or may not have changed, but nothing has changed on the system side.
So now, when we're looking at this, we have the city reported and Rubicon reported. So you have 393 that the city reported and 320 that Rubicon reported, or that was reported to Rubicon. Correct. Is there some kind of internal city system that we've used in the past that, say, some drivers are coming in and they're turning in their 393 tickets, yet they're forgetting to take pictures of the 73 extra tickets?
We get a weekly report from the landfill that tells us the number of trips and the weight.
So the Rubicon reported ones, are the drivers are self-reporting these into the Rubicon system, but the landfill is giving us the other number?
Correct.
Okay. Now, to clarify, Mr. McAndrew there, the date was June 26th of this year. And when you look into overtime for those months and how many trucks were used for overtime in those days, the overtime correlates to how many trucks were used on the road?
The week of June 26th?
Correct.
Okay. So if we move on to the next slide. So as I said, we've been working closely with your team since August, well, before August, but we definitely started making some moves with the retraining that took place August 2nd and 3rd. But what have we seen since then? So with the tool that you have at your disposal, your team has identified 208 rental units that are receiving service today, but they're not being charged. And you can see the missed revenue that represents. So $62,400 in missed revenue from those 208 rental units. The team is continuing to go through the data, and we expect that there'll be more there. So we talk about ongoing efforts. There are also 4,600 delinquent locations that are receiving service, but they have not been paying. So that represents $1.4 million in missed revenue.
So these are apartment buildings that have more than 4 units? That should be hiring a private hauler?
Correct. Since we purchased the Talimi software, and actually the Talimi vendors and Rubicon vendors have been working together, we've been able to identify the apartment buildings that we thought had, say, 2 units, may have 4.
So what does that mean for you? If we look at the next tool, or next slide, please. When you identify locations that should not be serviced, you have the ability to turn those locations on or off as you need. So talking about the benefits of the system and how you're able to save money. Just looking and working with the team, we're recognizing that that ability to be able to turn on and off locations is key. As we showed you earlier, the discrepancy in wait tickets, we want to make sure that we're able to capture that. As I said, the system flags where there are areas where reconciliation should probably take place. Tim showed you early on what pre and post trips look like. So those are like DOT required vehicles. But what it also does is it gives your maintenance department insight into potential issues with your fleet. You want to know something before a $200,000 truck goes down. That's what your pre and post trip gives maintenance visibility into that. We've built out the routes. So we talked about you now have digitized routes. Those routes allow anyone to get in a vehicle, use the tablet, and go about servicing your location throughout the city. And what we're doing is working on balancing those routes so that we balance them and manage the trips to landfills. We talked about go-backs. You have the ability to see whether or not you're going to reduce or do return trips, but there's the ability to reduce them or eliminate them altogether. And then, the telematics that we talked about, that's where you're able to identify where your vehicle has traveled and collection is taking place. Once again, the real-time visibility into your operations. So we taled about our fleet optimization. So when we talk about
Before we move on from there, I'm going to stop again. So when we're looking at those cost savings, we've seen a couple. We've seen you tabulated about 81,600 for the go-backs, possible savings, and the rental units about 62,000. In August of 21, with your response to the RFP, you stated there was about $519,000 annually to be saved. Would that number still be correct?
That I'm not sure of, because I know some of that number factors in your optimization. We have not completed the optimization, so I don't have a figure that I can put on that. But we do anticipate that there are more savings to come out of fully implementing your optimized routes.
Yeah, why I say that was because in August of 21, that was the number that was stated, but by October of 22, it was stated that there was $395,000 annual in cost savings. So I saw that number come down, so I didn't know if we've changed what our savings would be.
I don't think it's fully baked. I know that there are savings numbers that are associated with obviously some of the stuff we talked about today, so no longer servicing locations that are not paying. The savings associated with digitizing routes, so there are some cities that print out paper routes. You no longer have to do that. But you look at all of that. We talked about the possibility of the savings that could be incurred from not going back, return trips. And then we also know that a large portion of savings are yet to be realized from the fleet optimization. So that's why I can't speak to whether or not that's a realistic number today, because we need those fleet optimization savings to come in.
Yeah, I go back to them because they were the promises that were given to us when we were asked to vote on this or not vote on it.
Yes.
With the truck maintenance, you do have a what's a engine health system that
Yes.
runs on these trucks. Has it caught any major mechanical issues at this point in time?
We could actually run a report. So we talked about a number of reports that are available to you. So there's a report where we can give you a vehicle like fleet health, and it depends on what you consider. There are fault codes that a mechanic may say, okay, I got another 5,000 miles before I need to address that. And then there are critical fault codes, transmission's about to blow up tomorrow. So we can't quantify what that means, but a fleet team can look at that and say, well, because we were able to capture this before it happened, that saved us an engine, that saved us a transmission.
So those diagnostics are on this system?
Correct, yes.
We can pull a real report today and get you that as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So we don't know if we've caught any of those, but has it helped with the maintenance schedule of trucks? Have we gotten our trucks onto a maintenance schedule due to the system and the data that we've
I don't
collected?
know that either of us are the right people to answer that question.
Can I just jump in here with regards to savings? So I'm looking at page 26 of the proposal, too. And it states, because there was a pilot, let's not forget you guys did a pilot and made recommendations. And based on that pilot, you said, we were told by some other folks that, because I was here, that, we're going to save $1 million a year. All right? Okay. But then I look at this, based on the pilot, that we should potentially realize $395,000 to annual cost. So have we realized any savings in you're here 2 years, your contract has 1 more year. Do we have to wait 3 years to see if we realized any savings?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say that you have realized savings. There's a savings number associated with digitizing your operations. There's a savings number associated with, so there are savings that we know you can realize, and then there are savings that you determine whether or not. So when we were talking about go-backs, that go-back number is only real if you decide to actually implement it.
Well, that's $63 a go back. All right.
But that is
I don't
also
get excited about that. You know what I get excited about? Potential realized savings of $395,000.
But that also goes back to driver engagement. So when we talked about the driver needs to be engaged and we moved that engagement number, engagement means more exceptions. More exceptions means more potential savings. So the savings are not fully realized because we know that there are certain steps that have not yet happened. We talked about optimization, and when that happens, then we'll see some more savings. But we also need to maintain driver engagement. Until we get driver engagement closer to the numbers that we projected in your proposal, you're not going to realize that.
Councilman, I'll add another savings that has become possibly relevant to us now. As we have the list of properties that are billed, correct, for trash. But by doing this, we know where the trash is being collected. So, we're starting to evaluate those two spreadsheets of data to see where there's a mismatch, and are there potentially places where we're collecting data where we're not billing. So that's another potential area for us to see additional revenue.
So you're talking about the 1.4 missed, $1.4 million missed?
No, because they're the people we billed that are delinquent. I'm talking about people that we might not be billing, period.
Well, that's
Hannon-
revenue, which is great, but that's not the savings. That's the potential revenue, but
But we wouldn't have been able to sort this out
that's a
if we
bonus.
didn't have
I
the
get it's a
data.
bonus, but I still want to see the savings with what was sold to us, the contract itself. That's what I'm looking at now.
Can I ask what the average implementation time is? Like, you're obviously in other cities across the country, I would imagine. So, like, how does Scranton compare in terms of our implementation time with other cities?
So I believe, if I could just refer back,
Like, are we better? Are we worse? Are we?
Atlanta was one.
okay, so we started, essentially I would say that we started implementing in February of 2022. You were launched by April of 2022. That's longer, but I do know that at the time, you all requested a delay in launching for whatever was going on at the time. But typical implementation, anywhere between 30 and 90 days, depending upon how good is the data. how efficient are the operations? How quickly can you get us the information? So we're looking for, in the city of Scranton, where are your service locations taking place? You all didn't have that when we launched, so we had to install the telematics and then watch the vehicles. So when we talked about that breadcrumb trail, the way we sort of like created these routes was to look at where the trucks were going. Going back to the drivers had the routes in their head, you installed a telematic device, and then you ran it for a month because we wanted to make sure that it was consistent each week. It looks like you're always in this area on a Monday. We can say that that's the Monday trash route. And we did that for a month. So there was some added time associated with your implementation because some of the information that we would have received, whether it's a spreadsheet or a map or a list of collections, we didn't have. The city didn't have that available to us. So I do know that it took longer to gather information because we were creating it as we went along.
Well, when you implemented in other cities, did the other cities already have the mapping done previous to you showing up?
There's a combination. When we work with other cities, they will either give us a map or they will actually give us a listing, an Excel listing. Maybe it comes from your billing department, water and sewer. So anyone that's receiving trash services is also lumped in somewhere else, but you give us that list. That's how we obtain collection points in other cities.
How about the time from implementation to optimization?
So we would not launch an optimization before 6 months of operations. So we started, what did we say? We said we launched in April of 2022. The optimization project started in December of 2022. The reason we want 6 months is because we want to look at your operations. Where are the drivers going? What is the disposal time? How many locations? How long are you at a disposal location? So we received 6 months of just watching your operations. And we can tell you that, in Scranton, when you go to a disposal location, whether it's a landfill, the MRF, or a transfer station, on average, your driver is spending 46 minutes at that location. That's helpful for us. So when we look at that, we look at you're running an 8-hour day, but you're not collecting 8 hours. There's the 30 minutes for a pre-trip, the 30 minutes for a post-trip. We factor in that 46-minute average for disposal, so we'll round that up and say that's 2 hours that you are not collecting in your day. How much time do you allocate for lunch? Is it 30-minute lunch and 2 15-minute breaks? That's another hour. So you now have broken out 3 hours of the collection day. So instead of you thinking that they're out collecting for 8 hours, they're really only collecting for 5.
Was it also able to identify, well, look at this truck, they're only doing, 220 stops. This other one's doing 450.
Yes.
In the same time, were you able to maybe redistribute as a result of some of that?
That is part of what an optimization do. There absolutely was route imbalance, so there were drivers that were going out and running a 200-stop route, and they'd be back by 10 a.m. You had other drivers that were running a 600-stop route, and they were incurring overtime. The optimization will balance out routes and get everyone back to a point where you're running about the same locations and hopefully you're coming in at about the same time.
So, and that optimization hasn't occurred yet, right? We're still in that process?
We did an initial optimization and we released that to the team in June of this year. So if we can go to what that looks like.
Have we reached an average number of pickups per truck now that we've gotten to that point?
So you were averaging about 500-600 stops per route when we fully optimize. That's what it will look like. What you see here is your existing Monday trash route, and you can see that the trucks are crossing each other. The color represents a route. So that violet is up north, it comes down south, and then it comes also over. And this is not unusual. This is what it looks like in a city that has its operation grow over time. Tim has 300 stops, and we had 50 more stops that came online. Let's just put it on Tim's route. No regard to where Tim is in the city, so maybe he starts out in the north. Those 50 extra stops that we put on his route take him down to the south. So, but that's what happens with an operation over time. You get something that looks like this.
So now, just going with that example that you just gave, and I could see it here, so we could pick any of them. Say the dark green that's down in the bottom left-hand corner. If the driver starts there, right, gets up to the line where the purple begins, say is that the morning piece of the route, they drive to the landfill in Dunmore, and then they come back, and then they start on this end coming down?
That route shouldn't exist.
That's a possibility?
Yeah, no, that route should not exist. They should not, you shouldn't build a route that has a break in it and think that, okay, on the way back, you'll hit. That's just not the way you would build it. You would build it so that it's much tighter. And the next slide will show you what we did with that same route and what it looks like after we optimize it. So it's much tighter. You don't see that overlap. You don't see someone going from north all the way south, coming east. It's much tighter. That's the way you want to build a route. So if in that purple that Tim is highlighting, at some point the driver breaks off to go to a disposal location, we don't then expect that when he's on his way back, he should service maybe a location that's in that sort of lighter blue in that same sort of island there. We want them to come back to the route. That's what it looks like when you optimize a route. So we have optimized your trash routes, and we delivered that to the team in June.
I'm sorry, so when you say the optimization occurred in June.
Yes.
And we were asking earlier about what could have happened in June and July, causing all those routes to be missed. Couldn't these two be related?
I would say that we delivered the optimization the first week of June. The team turned it on and started running it. It did not run throughout the month of June. So we could remove optimization from the July consideration.
So
They were not running optimized routes in July.
So it launched, the optimized routes launched in June,
Correct.
and then at some point in time in June, they ended, and they didn't run optimized routes in July.
That is correct, yes.
And that was where I was saying when it comes to say that, I don't know the June 26th date, but it seems to fall on the June 26th date that something was changed, and then overtime from there begins to increase for quite some time from there.
Okay.
Why didn't they continue with those optimized routes?
So that's what our next slide will get into. So we optimize, and then some of the challenges that we've identified or discussed today became apparent. We realized that we did not have complete route data. So while we went out and we installed telematics and drivers were driving around, there was room for error in there. And we identified with the drivers that not all of the routes were appropriately capturing where they were servicing. The other thing we realized is when we talked about early on, your drivers had their routes in their head, there was no mention of needing navigation for your drivers. They know the city, they know their routes. And so when we delivered these routes, there was no express interest in navigation. When they actually went out and started running these routes, the drivers determined that they were not familiar with these new routes and they needed navigation. And then what we'll say is they were not appropriately tested. So what we do is we optimize routes, we deliver them, and then we encourage your team to go out and test them. Do you test them in the real world environment with your vehicles? Some cities actually will just go out in pickup trucks and run the route. Make sure it makes sense, make sure our vehicles can traverse these roads, but there are different testing mechanisms that we use when we optimize. That wasn't done here. So all of that led to the backing out of those optimized routes. So we delivered in June, we ran into these issues, and I would say easily before the end of the month, we realized we needed to revert back to your existing routes, and that's where we are right now.
Thank you for clarifying that. That's where we've been trying to get
Okay.
for quite since June.
Yeah.
So you've just answered council's question as what happened in June. Thank you.
I'll give you another date. On June 28th, this became a technology project. So as that process was unfolding and when Fred spoke to testing, it's absolutely an issue if a system is not testing when it's being deployed. So we have, and you can see through this whole conversation, we've put a number of steps in place to ensure that this is firing on all cylinders. That includes the retraining, that includes the vesting of the drivers in this tool. They were not brought under a tent in the beginning of this. So when we think about these pieces, it just wasn't implemented correctly back in 2022. So we're at a point now where we have our path forward. Fred's taking you through these pieces. We've got one more slide involved, but I think the reality is there's two things at play here. We talked about digitizing city services. There was no digitization of city services before these projects started. It needed to happen. It just did. It's going to be painful. That's a reality as well. When we go through and build these back, it's something that's absolutely delivering value. I see these reports now. This is not I'm not at DPW, but I see what these guys are able to do, how hard they're working through these pieces, the tool set that they have. This is all going to fall now in the next, we'll talk about timeline, but going into Q1 of next year, we've got optimized routes, we've got driver engagement, we've got all the pieces, and now we will treat this as a technology tool that they're able to work with going forward.
So also thank you, because again, this is where we've been trying to get to what is the issue and what has occurred. So there were two instances. One happened in '22, and it was a very similar instance where we're still working out the kinks here in '22. It went offline back to the way it was done, and then there was another rollout in June of this year that occurred the same way, back to the drawing board again as to optimization.
With the optimized routes, correct.
Okay, and it's now gone from DPW to IT department?
It's still absolutely working in DPW. We're attempting to help through the optimization in the organization. Any training needs, any hardware needs, any understanding of the system, any understanding of the reporting, we're there to augment.
Okay, I think at the time that would have probably cleared up a lot of the muddied waters. All
I
right.
mean, you could also see how this would alter, like, the confidence and trust that, you know, maybe council and even the employees could have in the optimization of the routes. So I understand that, you know, the reasonings that you gave for that not working out over June, but obviously we need to correct
Yes.
those things for the future so that it goes more smoothly, which is what we all want. in the
And
process.
I'm confident we'll get there. You know, working with your team here, we've seen the improvements that we're able to talk to you about today. We've identified where there are areas where we need to see improvement. Routing needs to be improved, and your team is going to get us there. So we've identified a couple of sets of data, and we're reconciling those, and we're working with your team. Once we have what we consider the best route data, collection data throughout the city, what we are committed to doing is turning that around and delivering optimized routes, re-optimized routes within 45 days of that new collection data set. We will definitely build in a testing period. We know that did not happen appropriately. This time around, we will make sure that we have appropriate testing, and we will engage with your team and also with our IT team members here to make sure that testing is appropriate. And all of that looks like we will be able to deliver optimized routes for, as Jack said, first quarter of 2024, you know, right after the holidays.
I would also like to add, I think that it would be helpful for us to be included in that process, to know when the testing's occurring or when the optimization is taking place, because we're the ones that a lot of those complaints are coming through. So then we know what's going on. Instead, we were begging for answers,
Yeah.
like what's happening, and going off of what we're hearing from others rather than from Rubicon or even our own DPW.
And that's a valid point. We are working with the city of Cleveland on their snow operations, and part of their testing took place in July. And they knew that residents would call because there were going to be snow plows on the street in July. Why are you running snow plows in July? Because they were testing. To your point, they made that available. Their social media, they got it out there that we were testing routes, and so virtually there were no calls associated with people being concerned about snow plows running in July. But that's a point well taken. We will make sure that you're aware of testing when it takes place.
Thank you.
So that wraps up what we wanted to talk to you all about. Hopefully we've answered the questions that you had, but please at this point, if there's something more that we can address, feel free.
So My questions go to overtime. So I got into overtime as issues arose, as I had numbers to work with. These were my variables that I check into to see what's going on. So I got into overtime, and I went through from 626, and it's funny that I have all of my overtime from 626 up until today, and I see, you know, how many trucks are running from this overtime, how much overtime hours we've done. And I guess this would be a question for the business administrator. So I go back to 2020 to pull these numbers up. DPW refuse overtime was budgeted at $200,000 in 2020. We used up 78% of that for a total of $156,757. Moving into 2021, we get to 97% usage at, again, budgeting $200,000 and spending $193,700. 22, we get into over 100% usage. We get 101% usage at $202,931. So we've seen this overtime for refuse tick up, yet in 2023, we decide to budget at $175,000 rather than $200,000, as we're now, that number is becoming most accurate. Projecting out this year, if I was going to go with these 4-year numbers, with refuse going into the months of, because September isn't currently on our overtime report, September, October, November, December, it looks like now we're going to have gone from 78 to 97 to 101 to this year, we're probably going to be projected to like 112, 120% overtime. So we're definitely going to be going, well, that may be at the 200,000 mark. It might be a little bit more than that with the 175 budgeted. This system and getting this system online is the cause for this overtime, correct?
No, I don't really think the system putting the system online is the cause for the overtime. I hope that as we move forward with the system and get better acclimated with it, that's actually the reverse happens. I would have to talk to DPW to really get a full understanding of why they think that there's overtime, more overtime, but we do see an uptick in the amount of garbage that is out. So over time, as we have additional residents and therefore we have additional garbage. I don't know if that's the full and complete explanation. I don't know about the answer to that.
So this year would be, so the system has gone online, the tool is at hands, and our refuse coordinator this would be the first time out of these 4 years that this individual has had this tool at hand. Would it have been easier, or should it have been easier to see this uptick in overtime and be able to address it?
Would have been easier to see. I hope that it would have been easier to see. I can only talk about how we're going to move forward, right? You know, looking back, I really can't, answer questions that happened in the past, but we can look forward, because you're right, we do have excess overtime. We're over the budgeted amount. Whether or not the 175, it obviously didn't seem to be the accurate number to put in there if we had 200,000 in the past. But if this tool is able to give us with optimized routes, because if we have people that are doing routes that are much longer, 600 trucks, well, that's going to cause them to have their truck full and have to go to the dump twice. It just makes sense that they would have to go. And, Fred brought up about the 45 minutes at the dump. That's on average. What we hear from the drivers, it's often longer depending on conditions at the dump. So that actually pushes them further behind. So there's other mitigating circumstances that go into that cause that to occur.
Yeah. I mean, my role here is to oversee the contract and to oversee our spending. So that's why my questions relate to the contract and spending. Do we have assigned times when our trucks are going to the dump?
I don't know the answer to, I don't think we have assigned times.
So when the truck reaches an underweight yet efficient capacity, we're going, and it's not dictated by any time of the day.
Not that I'm aware of. The other thing I'll share that has been a fantastic educational experience is how the dump operates, and the fact that our drivers are not given any sort of preferential treatment when they get there. Based on what we pay, we do not go to the front of the line. So there's variables at play here that just cannot be managed by any system or any any human, we're past that. So I can appreciate the questions, and to your point about, how do you sort of manage this or kind of stay with it. The route size was also an excellent education. The fact that we have 13 drivers, that's, less than the routes that we run every day. So that's a very simple way to say, if we're running 15 routes and we have 13 drivers, how are we going to get that all done? So there's pieces that are simple math with this that just still don't work, and we need to invest in. So.
Well, I personally feel that some of the reason for the excessive overtime is this summer's optimization hiccup and the smaller trucks. No one talks about the smaller trucks we purchased. And where every other municipality is using 30s, and we're using 20s now, for whatever reason. So is that a factor in some of your data collection, the wear and tear on a 20 versus a 30? Because we're doing double runs now. Was that, I don't think that was in the thought process before you guys came here, but smaller trucks, I don't think are working. I think that's part of the problem. And now, because of that, the answer might be to buy more trucks, which isn't the right answer, but I think that contributes to some of these problems too, that no one wants to talk about. There was a poor purchase, I believe.
We do look at the truck capacity when we're optimizing. If I would say the aha moment for me was realizing that we do a calculation. So we basically say that residential trash, a household will generate anywhere between 30 and 35 pounds per collection. The aha moment that I had was when I realized that those trucks actually pick up bulk collection. So in the course of picking up a bag, a container, they may pick up a couch or a mattress. That was news, and so that skewed the weights that we attributed to those vehicles. So we didn't factor in bulk, because in other operations, bulk is separate from your residential collection. It happens on a different day, it happens with a different truck. So learning as we dug into this, learning that was happening, that's the way that you all had structured your bulk operations, it immediately threw the calculations off. So regardless of the size of the vehicle, we were going to be off because of the way that the operation was structured with regard to bulk collection.
Is that what you would often see with the bulk collections in other cities where it might be something that occurs on another day, or I know there are some places that don't accept bulk?
So
as
we
well?
are, I had mentioned earlier, we are looking at the ordinance, the trash ordinance, and that's one of the things we are looking at, because there is an excessive amount of bulk out, and it's out every day of the week. And to Fred's point, we're filling the truck with couches and other large items. And these are also, they're safety issues for our staff. They're often heavier to get them up and get them in the truck. Plus, they fill the truck up faster.
Eileen, what was the rationale for the smaller trucks? Those areas where, like, there's alleys and really
Right,
tight...
that was my understanding. The smaller trucks were purchased because we were having difficulty. We have a lot of residents that put their trash out in their alleys, so we're having difficulty navigating the larger trucks down those alleys and damaging properties along the way.
So now that, how many of these trucks do we have in our possession at this point in time? I know we've at least received one or two, and there was a total of...
The 9.5-ton trucks?
The 20-yard trucks.
We have 5 of them.
There are 5 of them, I think.
5.
And do we have all 5 in our possession at this point in time?
Yes, we have all the trucks.
All right. Now that we have, now in the capital budget, remind me, are we doing any other garbage trucks at this point in time or not?
There are additional ones in the capital budget. I don't believe they're in next year. I think they're in the following year.
All right, so this, having 2 years of data on this would, I would assume, help out with what size trucks we should be buying to give an accurate recommendation on those trucks?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. We did have an 11-yard truck. Do you know the status of the 11-yard truck?
I do not know the status of that truck. No. Yeah.
Is it still in our possession?
I would have to look. I don't know.
With the data that we have, we also know that holidays and things, so we have our routes, you're getting the optimization done, you're balancing those routes, you're making them more efficient, you're hopefully eventually going to cut down on the number, I'm not sure. I know that was one of the goals initially. Are we going to be able to cut down any routes, or this is the amount of routes that we will have?
We'll look at the, so when we do an optimization, we look at the entire collection schedule, and we ask a couple of questions. Can we change days of service? Most time the answer is no. If you're a Monday collection before optimization, we want you to stay on Monday. So that means that whatever Monday, if you pick up 5,000 households on Monday, then we will work with 5,000 locations that need to be optimized. Depending upon your trucks and your staffing, that could be, we build out 5 routes of 1,000 stops each. But, you know, we're talking about smaller vehicles, and that would be where you could possibly, instead of 5 routes of 1,000, maybe you need to build out 10 routes with 500 stops each. So depending upon the parameters and constraints, and this is something we discuss with your team, we talk about fleet optimization constraints. What can we do? What's off the table? What does your equipment look like? What does your staffing look like? And based on that, we will build out the routes based on equipment, staffing, and days of service. So it's a lot that goes into it.
All right, and then the next level is trends built around holidays, things like that. I'm sure with 2 years, would you need more than 2 years to, get those trends as to Christmas refuse is higher than others, anything
Yeah.
like that, or we already know that?
We know that not only from Scranton, but we also know it from the 100+ other cities we're looking at. So in the South, there's heavy, right now they're about to roll into leaf collection. So that's something that will be large. They'll do that up until about Thanksgiving, early December at the latest, and then they'll stop. Areas where there's snow, you know that that's going to impact your solid waste operation. So looking at Scranton, comparing it to other operations where we're able to look and make assumptions around what your seasonality looks like. You're absolutely right. After Christmas, you're going to see a lot more material in the waste stream, but you should see a lot more recycling in the waste stream. Everything sort of went out the window with COVID. The trash that you had here generating at work got transferred to home, right? So COVID was a bit of an anomaly. It threw numbers out. So we would have to sort of set aside the COVID years when people were working from home. They weren't going into offices. We saw that a lot of people, what did they do? Online shopping. Online shopping generated a lot more recycled material. All those Amazon boxes, that's increasing in your recycling. So we did see an uptick in materials during the COVID years. Also, when people were home, what did they do? There was a lot of cleanup that took place. People cleaned out garages and attics. And so we saw a significant increase in tonnage during the COVID years because of behavior that changed. But yes, we know what happens seasonally based on what Scranton looks like, in addition to what other cities are doing. And we did see that there were changes in that information based on the COVID years.
And
All right.
one thing just to note, we wanted to note that we really don't have any intention of eliminating any routes. We just want to make the routes more proportional and
I'm going back to the contract, and I know that those were like the 3 stated goals. I think balance, efficiency, possibly reduction in routes, from what I could recall. So I was just asking if they are the same goals now as they were at that point in time.
right. The balance and the efficiency is really what the city's looking at.
So we did, you said 45 days from the last, and I don't know if rollout's the proper terminology, so we on council know what to use next time. So around June 26th, you put the system into live or whatever we want to
Early
call it.
June, I would say June 7th to be exact, is when optimized routes started running here in Scranton.
And we're going to call them optimized. So from here going forward, we'll call it when the optimized routes went into effect. What would be the wording?
That was in June. But remember, they were backed out and we reverted back to your existing routes.
And that was due to a backup of refuse?
The challenges that we experienced from rolling out optimized routes.
All right. What date do we expect that to roll out again? Do
So
we have
that's
the
what
date?
we were talking about. We're working with the team on getting collection locations, making sure we're comfortable. If you could pull that slide back up. No. The last slide before questions. Yeah. So, we need to get comfortable data, that we all mutually agree these are where you are collecting in the city of Scranton. Once we get that, we will then know what our universe looks like. Are we optimizing on 20,000 locations, or are we optimizing on 22,000 locations? But once we know what the universe is, then we can go about optimizing based on your constraints. And that'll take us, as I said, I believe that we'll be able to do that, especially since a lot of the work is already done. What I anticipate doing is, because you said, don't change days of service and balance out routes. If we have to add another 2,000 locations that have been found, that gets spread out over the course of the 5 days that you're collecting. I don't anticipate that we're doing a significant rework. It's just tweaking of what's out there right now. So we anticipate we can do that in 45 days, deliver it to the team for testing. Now, what I will say is what we do is we optimize trash first, and then we build off of that. So when we're talking about this delivery, we're talking about what we did in June was deliver optimized trash routes. We will repeat that once we have the data and deliver optimized trash, and we build from that. Once we have agreement that your optimized trash routes work, we then build off of, we build your recycling, the commingle, the paper, we build off of the trash routes.
Okay, so we didn't even get into recycling yet, just
You did not.
refuse at this point?
You did not.
All right, so we should be looking at January.
Yes.
Okay.
And Councilman, at the same time, we want to look at the idea of how can we establish bulk routes, right? So that we can have one truck collecting bulk pickup.
What was it? Oh, bulk
Bulk.
pickup. All right. Moving forward, who is the IT department in charge of, like, can you give us the hierarchy here of who's supervising what?
Hierarchy is probably the wrong word to use. The reality of what DPW's day-to-day is doesn't really mesh with rolling out a software system, so that's why we got involved. So from that standpoint, there's been retraining across the board, anything that the supervisors need to understand what's happening with the tool set or what they can be doing with the tool set. There's a number of people that have been cross-trained now, both in department and out of department. So to that end, this still lives in DPW and is still operated by the DPW team. We're involved to make sure optimization goes smoothly, and anything that we need to add on to make sure that we have the right pieces in place goes. To give you an idea, routes in terms of how they get turned on and off is something that we can support the team with. It's a lot easier for them to ping us and say, hey, can you spin these routes up, rather than them having to get back, do the work, that type of stuff. So it's a little more, think of it like help desk. When you need a password change, you're going to end up bugging us too. So it's that
Yeah.
type of support.
So it looks like,
Does it allow monthly reports then for the supervisor to run monthly reports to track everything?
We can run daily reports in this.
Daily reports, okay. And is that what you were referring to, Tom, so we can get?
well, that was on the, for the weights, for daily weights at the landfill. So it looks like IT, so just to get it back, IT is doing training and help with optimization.
Correct.
And then, so now, so the DPW refuse coordinator, is he going to be the person that has this tool at his hands?
He still does today have this tool at his
Okay,
hands,
so
yes.
he's utilizing this
Yep.
tool for these routes, and
Yep.
he's going to be able to decide, he can see where the trucks are at, what overtime's going to look like, et cetera. When it comes to ad hoc routes, a driver gets sick, has to go home, something happens like
That's all
that,
handled down in DPW.
it's all going to be down there?
Yep, still is today.
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I got one final question. We got to get moving here. You guys got to get moving. I get it. So, okay, so we have the hiccups with the optimization during June, all right?
Yes.
Past 2 Junes, we've identified that. And then that's when garbage sat and all hell broke loose with us and everybody. All right, so you're going to re-optimize almost into year 3. So I'm asking, outside of utilization of the technology, are we going to rely on the driver's expertise or the boots on the ground for their input? Because we're going back to kind of their routes. So moving forward, are we going to have that conversation or collaboration with them?
They absolutely will. So whenever we optimize and we have operational managers in the conversations. It would be foolish to optimize without them. They know what's happening on the street. They have the expertise. They are part of the conversation.
Not the managers, I mean the drivers.
Well, that information should work its way up through Are we going to have individual drivers? No, but we look to leadership to have that expertise. Talk to the drivers, you understand what they're going through, and bring that to the table. So we believe we have a driver's voice when we're talking to operational management.
Okay.
So, and we have offered support. We have a project manager that is assisting with this as well, in addition to IT. So we've offered additional supports to DPW so that we can get to where we need to be when we optimize.
And the project manager, explain how the project manager helps out with that?
So she's down there on a relatively frequent basis, but has Rubicon, she understands the system, so she works with IT to help look for bugs in the system to make that work out. She's not doing the day-to-day with the DPW managers, but she's working hard to make sure the system works.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank you all for coming here this evening. Very informative. Appreciate you answering all of our questions. We're obviously hoping that we can get the system optimized and running the way that we all expect, effectively, efficiently, and hopefully saving the city some money moving forward. But maybe, down the road, we may ask you to come back as we get to full implementation and optimization of this program. So thank you again for coming this evening, and we'll take a 2-minute break and we'll start our meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.